Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. Kieran, I saw you last night. It was lovely to see you. We did a Palace podcast stream that turned out to be live on YouTube, which they probably should have told us longer than a minute beforehand to give us time to reset our discretion buttons. But it was lovely to see. Did you have a nice night afterwards?
I did, mainly making ice baths for the Baroness, who's still in recovery mode. But yes, it was great, and all of the Palace fans were very kind to me. Yes. I was expecting a bit more flack, but
not kind. What do you?
Fine bunch of individuals.
You're a kind person, Kieran, when you give off nice. And before some of our less mature listeners start sniggering about why the Baroness is in an ice bath, Kieran, perhaps you could explain what a brilliant thing she did and why she's in that ice bath.
Well, she raised money on Saturday. She did the South Coast Ultra walk/run. It said it was a walk for her, so it's going all up and down the Seven Sisters. So it's quite a tough walk, and it was 57 kilometres from Eastbourne to Hove. It took her 14 hours and 55 minutes, but she's raised well over £2,500 for the cancer drop-in centre that our son-in-law Andy went to. He was diagnosed with a brain tumour and he sadly passed away last year. It was fantastic for him and it was fantastic for the family. So it was the least she felt she could do.
That's good. I presume that the South Coast walk, that's vineyard to vineyard, is it, I presume?
I would imagine so, yes.
It's questions day, Kieran, but there are a couple of news stories to catch up on, one of which is going to raise many eyebrows, I think. But first of all, we have had a lot of Forest fans asking us to clarify something around the Leicester situation. In Forest fans are saying, weren't they in the EFL for part of the accounting period for which they had points deducted? So what's the difference between their situation and Leicester's, essentially?
Well, yes, Nottingham Forest, they joined the Premier League in mid-June 2022. That's when the shares are handed over. So actually, for the financial year to the 30th of June 2023, they were actually a member of the Premier League for the full 12 months. Even if if the shares had been transferred across in July, potentially Nottingham Forest might have been able to claim that they made some of the losses in 22-23 when they were not a member of the Premier League. And perhaps they could have gone down the same route as Leicester City. I think the Leicester City is intriguing. Our good friend Nick DeMarco has fired back at the Premier League because the Premier League is there simply to apply the rules, and Nick was, I think, understandably, unhappy with the reaction of the Premier League to the announcement. The Premier League drafted the rules poorly, and that's the long and the short of it. And people say Leicester got away on a technicality. Well, another word for a technicality is a rule.
Yeah.
And if you draw up poor technicalities or poor rules, then expect to be on the receiving end of that. Looking at it, and let's remember, we are pub lawyers, and experienced pub lawyers, to be fair, but we are still pub lawyers. I don't think that retrospectively Nottingham Forest could have gone back with that same route, because they were, in my view, a member of the Premier League for the whole of the 12 months involved.
Interestingly, Kieran, as well, I've heard from other friends in the legal business that we talk about the Premier League drawing up the rules, but in fact, without naming them, it was probably another legal company that drew up the rules on their behalf. But you were saying last night on this Palace live YouTube thing that it's a possibility that this all came down to one letter, a block capital in one sentence, Kieran. Could you elaborate?
That's right. If you go to the Premier League handbook, it starts off with a series of definitions, and that is actually quite common. Right. You have to define your terms. And intriguingly, as far as the Premier League handbook is concerned, there are two definitions of the word club. There's a definition using club with a capital letter, and there is a separate definition using the definition of a club with a lowercase c. I use something which I do use when I'm going through courses. So if anybody's easily offended, please just bleep out the next few seconds. But let's start off with the following scenario using capital letters. If I say to you, will you please help Uncle Jack off the horse? You'd reach one interpretation. If we were now to turn that into lowercase letters, and I say to you, would you help Uncle Jack off the horse? It means something completely different, or it can be interpreted, should we say, in a completely different manner. And it was this particular issue which formed part of, not the whole, but part of the overall conclusions which were reached by the Commission when Leicester took this case to the beak.
To my shame, Kieran, it took me about 20 seconds to work out last night why you'd indicated that sentence was going to be rude. I simply couldn't work out what it was. And then I spluttered like a nun being told a dirty joke, which is very funny. And also, Kieran, we should do the bleeping out. You shouldn't really ask people to do their own bleeping, so you don't know what they're going to be bleeping out. You can understand why Nick DeMarco was hit back, because he was getting criticism in the way that they used to call him the loophole lawyer, didn't they, back in the day, the guy that footballers and football managers used to employ to get them off driving charges on a technicality. But as you say, one person's technicality is another person's rule. And I think this will rumble on, this debate, and certainly the next time any club have a points deduction, they'll be looking at the Leicester and going, well, how come it's us? But for now, let's park it, Kieran, which is a subconsciously clever way of moving on to the next story. And I think this is a story that will raise eyebrows all over the globe, Kieran, because we've been discussing Premier League clubs changing their car park charges for disabled season ticket holders and changing their mind. And there's been further developments this weekend with several clubs.
That's correct. We were originally contacted by a Manchester City blue badge holder a month or two ago. And he said that Manchester City had gone from an old position of not charging blue badge holders to park if disabled fans are going to see City at the Etihad, to charging them effectively £12 a match. It worked out, I think it's something like £220 a year. And then there was complaints from the Manchester City Disabled Fans Organisation, and City sort of backtracked, and they said, right, we'll introduce it in two phases. So it will be £112, and then it's going to double in 25, 26. And I think the argument which we put forwards, or rather the argument that the club had put forwards, was that some matches, 50% of the car park spaces were unused. People were abusing the system. So that was the club's solution. And it looked like a very clunky solution, which just happened to be raising a bit of money. So I think the City Disabled Fans Organisation, and I think we suggested something similar as well, it's a bit like the position you now have with many restaurants, because of no-shows. If you book a table, they take a £25 deposit per person. If you don't turn up, you lose your deposit.
Yeah.
And I think fair play to City. They tried to take all of the credit for this, which I think is a bit disingenuous of them. But ultimately, they have now done the right thing. And if you want to book a place, you pay a £6 deposit. If you turn up to the match, you get your £6 back.
Yeah.
That's great. We also saw some issues with Aston Villa last week as well. And there was a lot of unhappiness with regards to the pricing for the Champions League matches. Yeah. And again, I think we're not cynical, as we've often said, but the cynic in me thinks this is pretty disingenuous by the club as well. A couple of days after the announcement of charging fans up to £97, and that includes, juniors as well in certain areas of the ground, charging up to £97 to watch Villa in the Champions League. Villa had said they were going to double car parking charges for blue badge fans from £190 to £380. And people like Stan Collymore, he was very angry about this, and it did go into the newspapers. Yeah. And then the club did a U-turn. Then the club backed down and said, right, we're going to reverse that. We're still going to charge £190.
Yeah.
So they've done the right thing-ish. I still think it's ridiculous that, for people who don't have the option, you and I have the option as to how we go to a match.
Yeah.
I can get a bus, I can get a train, I can drive and pay parking. I can even cycle if I want to. if I'm a disabled fan, those options are not available to me.
Yeah.
So I still think it's what Villa are doing is harsh. And we also said when we originally raised the issue on the show that Manchester United, and I was contacted by a Manchester United fan on this, Manchester United have increased their charges for disabled fans from £260 to £333. So it was a 20% increase. Yeah, that's £17.50 a game.
Yeah.
So rather than just have a moan about it, we did contact the club. And to be fair, the club responded on a Sunday afternoon. And I'm now going to give you verbatim the position of Manchester United. There is no change in our position. In terms of background on this, we have previously consulted with disabled fans and campaign groups on this issue, and the clear consensus was that disabled fans want to be treated equally with non-disabled fans, not as charity cases. We think it is the right approach to charge for disabled parking places as we do for all other fans. So that is the Ineos position. That is the Jim Ratcliffe position with regards to that.
When you contacted me yesterday, Kieran, to tell me that, I had to see it written down before I would believe it. It's an astonishing position. And we hold no animus against Man United as a club. If this was Sterling Albion doing the same thing, we would be just as upset. But United are a global brand, Kieran. This is not acceptable to say that. I'd be interested to learn their definition of consensus with disabled fans. But you might as well argue, if you're going to say, oh, well, our disabled fans say they want to be treated like the rest of us, so they want to pay the full car park space, you might as well say that wheelchair ramps are patronising. Because if that's the case, well, yeah, make your own way into the club. It makes no sense whatsoever. And we need to publicise this, Kieran, because it is Ineos, as I'm sure you say, but Jim Ratcliffe needs to be named and shamed about this. And again, we've reached out to United. If they want to come on and talk to us about it, fantastic. If Man United fans who are disabled want to come on and agree with United, fantastic. But quite right, Finley. Now, Finley, for once, is really tapping into the mood of the pod. Well done. What happened there? Who turned up? Whoa. New postman?
It is a new postman. Yes, yeah. Kevin, the postman, he's got... Yeah, postmen get recycled.
It's what?
The post office do not want your local postman to get to know you too much, so they recycle the postman.
Oh, what, in case they're casing your house? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, not Kevin. Kevin's a great guy.
Of course. Well, there are people who think Uncle Terry's a great guy. People that go, well, Uncle Terry? No. Really? Yeah, we'll get recycled in here. Now, this time next year, when Justin Morehouse is asking Swiss Ramble questions, Kieran, we'll know how it feels. As I say, I think that's an outrageous response from Man United, Kieran. I really do, but I would be interested to hear from disabled Man United fans as to whether they agree with that, because it may be that we're patronising them by saying that Man United are in the wrong. I don't know, but I just think this is a story that needs to be shared with the world. So on to questions, Kieran. And our first question comes from Remigiusz Kuczykowski. Now, I took advice on that, Kieran, from Polish friend of the show. I have to say, though, experience tells me to be slightly wary on taking advice from Polish people, because way back in the day, I had a massive, when I was 17, I had a massive crush on a Polish girl who went to the Catholic girls' school just down the road. We had two Catholic girls' schools near us, Kieran. One was slightly rougher than the other, and the headmaster once said, he actually said this, I won't name the schools, but he said, what my advice is, practice on the girls from school A and marry a girl from school B. Right, that was his advice. But I had a massive crush on a girl from school B who was Polish, and I asked one of my best mates, who amazingly is still one of my best mates, who's Polish, Dominik Szambowski, I said, just give me a little phrase that I can throw into the conversation that indicates I've got a crush on her and perhaps we could go for a walk. So, and to this day, I still don't know what the phrase was that he taught me to say, but the colour drained from her cheeks and she didn't speak to me for about 3 months. So I'm hoping that the advice we got from the Polish friend of the pod is more grown up and that I've pronounced Remigiusz Kuczykowski's name correctly. But his question relates to the impact of funding for small clubs from UEFA through results in competitions such as the Europa Conference League. At first, says Remigiusz, I was a bit sceptical about these games, which essentially is the new Intertoto Cup. But after watching the atmosphere of matches in smaller stadiums, I became a big fan. But my question arose when a club from my country, Raków Częstochowa, qualified for the... I've got it written down phonetically, Kieran, but I suspect I got that wrong. But they qualified for the European competition for the first time. They're a small club, having only qualified for Poland's top division in 2019. When they made it through the qualifiers, they received a sizable financial injection, which would cement their position in the domestic competition for years to come. Is there any data that would show which clubs have won how much money over the seasons in the Europa Conference League? It's an interesting question, Kieran, because we have been slightly dismissive of the Conference League, but as Remigio says, for smaller clubs, it's a lifeline. These clubs are never going to get in the Champions League, so this is, for their fans and for their clubs, this is a big bonus.
It is, and I was on Radio Shropshire, I think it was last week, talking about the impact of TNS in terms of their progress. The Europa Conference League is great fun. You talk to West Ham fans about their fun and games. To put things in context, the Polish league, the Ekstraklasa, which is pronounced completely with the wrong accent there by me, it has a TV deal which generates probably around €4 million per season per club. It's worth around about season. Now I don't know how it's split between the clubs.
Right.
So it's €67 million per season. There's 18 clubs, so we're talking about 4 million for each. If we take a look at Lech Poznan, and if you do want to find out these details, to be fair to UEFA, the UEFA annual report gives the distributions not only to each club that has qualified for the Champions League, the Europa League, and the Europa Conference, but also what they refer to solidarity payments for the 55 members of UEFA in total. And they get a couple of million each year to distribute sort of in general. Lech Poznan made €8 million in 22-23. So Lech Poznan, clearly a Polish club. So therefore they made twice as much money for qualifying for the Europa Conference League as they would have generated from their own league. So it is significant. And if we actually take a look at the numbers, you get just over €3 million for qualifying for the competition. You get €400,000 each victory that you have in the Europa Conference. So you've got 8 games. So there's the opportunity to make another 3.2 million. And then there are tiered bonuses as you go through each round. And on top of that, there's things called the market pool and so on. And the Polish TV authorities actually pay quite a lot of money to UEFA for the rights, and that's effectively gets recycled back into Polish clubs that qualify for European competitions.
So West Ham essentially would have won how much then for winning the Europa Conference?
West Ham made €22 million for winning the Europa Conference. Now, to put that in context, if you qualify for the Champions League, that's worth around about 30 million. Regardless of whether you win matches or not. So the way that it works is that for every £1 you make in the Champions League, there's probably about 22 pence is the equivalent in the Europa League, and probably around about 11 pence in the Europa Conference. I know the rules are being tweaked slightly. I think the Champions League is going to end up under the Swiss model, generating perhaps slightly less, but it's slightly less percentage of a much bigger cake because of the expansion of the competition that we have this season.
So clearly, to answer the question, for a club like Raków Częstochowa, that 22 pence in the pound is a substantial amount of money, isn't it?
Oh yeah. I think it is transformational. It's the same, I think, for the likes of TNS. We've seen some of the Irish clubs trying to get into even the group stage of the Europa Conference is very significant. It's the equivalent of a non-league club getting drawn to go to Old Trafford in the third round of the FA Cup. It can make a very significant difference. And I think, can that mean that club can leverage on that and get into a cycle of qualifying for Europe? As we always say, it's not the amount of money, it's how you spend it. If it's spent well, then yes, it certainly can enhance your position going forwards.
See, your mention of Radio Shropshire, Kieran, does give me some relief, because I do worry about pronouncing things correctly, but I just console myself with the fact that somewhere in Poland there'll be the Polish version of the price of football, and the Polish version of me will go, we've got a question here about, I don't know, Shrewsbury, what is it? And whatever he says, he'll get loads of angry tweets from players. Also, I'm slightly worried, Kieran. That's about the fifth time in 2 weeks you've used the phrase "to be fair to UEFA." It's either UEFA have upped their game, Kieran, or you're getting softer in your old age here.
Perhaps I'm being taking money from the establishment. Perhaps I've sold out, Kevin.
Well, it comes back to that Villa thing, which, Villa fans are quite right to highlight the amount that they're being asked to pay to watch Champions League games, whereas for UEFA's new scheme, the away fans are sitting there having paid considerably less, haven't they?
Well, yes and no. Our very good friend Matt Slater, he did a good article, as always, in The Athletic, saying, if you take a look at this cap, I think it's €60 for a Champions League match. The average for away fans last season was 47.
Oh, okay, right.
So, as always with a cap, is the cap above or below the current position? I think clubs like Real Madrid and Barcelona probably charge 80, so they will have to reduce theirs. My fear with caps is that caps become targets. It's a bit like the PSR losses at £105 million. If you talk, or rather, if you listen to fans from some clubs, they say losing anything less than very close to £105 million over 3 years is a sign of a lack of ambition by the owners. And I'm going, surely the club should be trying to break even.
Yeah.
So just always be careful when it does come to caps, because they too can have unexpected consequences or unintended consequences.
Dynamic pricing, Kieran, has become the topic du jour in the last couple of weeks. That's just a bit of a contradiction in the topic of the day in the last couple of weeks. But even last night, Kieran, on this live pod we did, dynamic pricing was a subject that came up several times. Now, so I don't know whether this next question is serendipity. I don't know whether this has been knocking about for a couple of years and just got to the top of the pile this week, or whether it's actually a topical question. But it comes from Alexander Calazzo. And Alexander lives over there in America. And Alexander says, I've been an Inter Miami season ticket holder since the club's inception in 2020. In that time, they've produced lacklustre football and barely any atmosphere in the stadium. Now, you'd think that signing arguably the greatest player in the history of the sport would be a reason to rejoice. Instead, unsurprisingly, it's been nothing but a money grab from the club. My row one seat, which I had for the full season and 2 cup games, came out to $745 for 2023. For Messi's debut, which occurred in the league's cup competition, season ticket holders had to purchase tickets in a dynamic pricing scheme, which resulted in most of us having to pay on average $300 per ticket per game. My seat for last season would have cost $1,995, excluding the cup games, which were included this past season, but not the upcoming one. The fans were rightfully upset. So that's a rise of $745, Kieran, to $1,995. And Alexander says, has there ever been such a dramatic price increase from one year to the next amongst the most popular clubs globally? And also, where would the cost of Inter Miami season tickets fall in line with prices amongst Europe's elite? So this is a 2-spreadsheet question, Kieran.
It is indeed. I mean, I did some research this. I spoke to one of my friends who's a Spurs fan, because I said, well, what happened in terms of your ticket price in respect of moving from old White Hart Lane to new White Hart Lane? I refuse to call it Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, Kevin. It's White Hart Lane. Quite right. And he said there was a significant increase, without doubt, but by the looks of it, not to the same extent here. I mean, we're talking about a 150% increase for Inter Miami. I think there's an issue in terms of culture. The culture amongst franchise owners in the United States, and also perhaps in respect of sports fans, is we're a capitalist country. It's supply and demand. If you won't pay $1,995, somebody else will. And that's, if you think about, we had that conversation with Andy Payne from West Ham on last Friday's show. It's the general consensus of trying to ease fans out who, in the opinion of the club's owners, and I think we have to be very careful in terms of that. We often talk about clubs. Football clubs don't have opinions. Football club owners have opinions. And so when we're talking about West Ham, we're talking about David Sullivan and Karen Brady. When we're talking about Manchester United, we're talking about Jim Ratcliffe. And when we're talking about Liverpool, we're talking about FSG. And that's I think where we should really be focusing in terms of the owners and FSG. Ultimately, it's John Henry and so on. So this is, I think, a fairly standard approach taken by American franchise owners. They are there to make a financial return on their investment. They're not necessarily interested in the sport. There appears to be an element of mission creep as far as the impact it's now having on the Premier League and English football with regards to the topics which we've raised. So that's the answer to Alexander's first question. In terms of the season ticket price amongst Europe's elite, I guess it depends upon where his seat is. If it's on the halfway line in the padded seats area, Arsenal's, I think, most expensive seats are probably around that.
Yeah.
Fulham, they're now charging £3,000 for some season tickets. So for, I think, the equivalent of a London club, you could be spending that. I was contacted by, ironically, another Manchester United fan who has been assisting us in relation to the issues with regards to disabled fans parking, who said that they have a corporate seat, and that's gone up from 3,600 to 6,000 for a season. Yeah, okay, you'll get a prawn sandwich for that as well, each match, and a programme thrown in. But the direction of travel is only one way. And unless fans are organised, unless fans mobilise, then I think the approach that will be taken by football club owners is, if we can sell out for £80 a match, then why should we charge 60? Why should we charge 50? And unless there are empty seats, that's what's going to be the case.
I remember talking a while ago to a mate of mine, a very wealthy mate of mine, who's decided that he wanted to take advantage of his money and get himself a proper upgraded posh season ticket at a club I won't name. And I was saying, well, that's lovely, I'm sure it is, but what are the real advantages? He says, well, you get a team sheet. I said, what time do you get the team sheet? It's about 2:05. I said, when the other 30,000 people in the ground have checked on their phones and got it at 2:00. So that's a lot of money to get a team sheet. Just in terms of balance, Kieran, and trying to be fair to Miami's owners here, would they argue that raising the season ticket prices so radically is the only way they could fund the Messi move, or is this simply cashing in on Mr. Messi?
I think there's an element of both. MLS does have, ironically, its own price cap in terms of wages. There is salary cost control, which is quite significant there. By all accounts, a significant amount of Lionel Messi's annual remuneration is coming from Apple, who have the TV rights to MLS, and Adidas, who are the kit supplier. And everybody's seen what has now become quite an iconic shirt in terms of the pink Inter Miami shirt. It's one of those things which is sold. If you go, I do a fair bit of travel, as you know. I go to airports, and you've got Manchester United, you've got Real Madrid, you've got Bayern Munich, you've got PSG, Inter Miami. It's there all the time. So there is a contribution coming from other stakeholders as far as the club is concerned. Why are people willing to pay $1,995? There's an element of the elephant man in this. It's right. Lionel Messi. He's a god in terms of footballing ability. I've seen him play once, so I can now say, I saw him play in the Champions League at Etihad. So if there are lots of people who want to be able to say, I've seen Lionel Messi play football, then you are paying. If you take a look at the prices for Oasis, why are people willing to queue up for 6 hours and to pay 150 quid for a glorified karaoke with a bunch of 50-year-old coked up blokes? It's because you can say you were there, and that's the situation.
Yeah, and in case our lawyers listening, Kieran's talking about the audience there.
Absolutely,
not Oasis. I'm always amazed, Kieran, and impressed by how our listeners can find new angles on old topics. And Jamie Walmsley has done exactly that, but it's a really interesting new angle on the fit and proper persons test debate. And Jamie Walmsley says, I was wondering what happens with regards to the fit and proper persons test when someone inherits a club. Does the beneficiary stepping in go through the same process as somebody buying the club would?
My understanding is that they would have to go through this.
Yeah. If
we take a look at what has recently happened at Fleetwood Town, for example, and this isn't inheritance, this was a slight complication caused by the club owner accidentally ending up in prison for 7 years due to fraud.
It can happen. It can happen.
It can happen.
It can happen.
Yeah. The money was resting in his account, as Father Ted would say. And the club was then passed across to the son of the owner. From what I understand, is that that person would then have to go through the owners and directors test. Now, if it was an inheritance and it was part of probate and so on, I think the EFL would be sympathetic in terms of until everything is sorted, we would allow you to continue as the owner, but you would still have to satisfy the test in due course.
Right, because did it not happen at Preston, Kieran, when Trevor Hemmings?
Yeah.
Did he not pass the
He passed away, and what's happening with Preston in terms of ownership, it's there on my wait and see list as to where the ownership could be in 1 or 2 years' time.
Oh, okay, right. We'll keep an eye on that then. Brian O'Connor has a very serious question, Kieran. Brian O'Connor says, at the outbreak of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, UEFA brought in rules to allow players in Ukraine to cancel their contracts so that they could leave an active war zone. Following the escalation of events in Israel and Palestine, have players at clubs such as Maccabi Tel Aviv been given a similar opportunity? If not, then how does UEFA decide which global events are worthy of rule changes?
Interesting question from Brian.
Yeah.
I'm not aware of UEFA making such a ruling, although I think they're, from the perspective of clubs involved, they might take a sympathetic approach to a player, especially if the player is an international player, to say, I don't feel as comfortable as I was due to what's happened. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they could cancel their contracts. And certainly there have been issues with regards to contract cancellations, which have got very messy following the Russian invasion of Ukraine. How do you define an active war zone? Unfortunately, you enter the world of geopolitics, and some views are very polarized on both sides in relation to this.
Our next question, Kieran, comes from one of our most long-serving and loyal listeners, Marcia Big. So other long-serving and loyal listeners will be going, oh, hello, this will either be about Chesterfield or the National League. And you're right, it is about Chesterfield and the National League. So Marcia says, at the end of the 2022-23 season, one of the Chesterfield directors said that the playoff final at Wembley had raised less money than one of their pre-season friendlies. He also said that the National League refused to give Chesterfield the financial breakdown from Wembley, and that it cost us £20,000 to play there, as we had to pay a certain amount for programme, perimeter, advertising, hospitality, and so on, whether we sold it or not. Now, we got into the final on the Sunday. Monday was a bank holiday, and advertising had to be in by Thursday to allow for the printing of the programme. Our fans assume it was the same for Notts County, although they had an extra day. Why is the National League hiding these figures? And is there a way of finding them out?
The National League is hiding the figures because the National League is an opaque organisation. We had David Bernstein on the show who did the investigation following the distribution of central funds during COVID and the way that they were allocated. And I think it's fair to say that his report and his conclusions were, I think his report was difficult to access, to put it mildly. I think he was very fair. And if people want to look at this in greater detail, I'd recommend they go to YouTube and take a look at the film Fair Game, or sorry, Ticket Money, Gate Money, it was called.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that just because I happen to stick my nose into it. My very good friend, Dame Tracy Crouch, she was on it as well, along with quite a few other people from a variety of clubs. How they chose to distribute the money, just by a pure coincidence, happened to benefit the clubs who are on the senior board at the National League. And these coincidences happen in life. So in terms of what's happening here, yes, Wembley does charge for the privilege of hosting a match of this magnitude. And from a fan's point of view, it's a great day out. What I would say here is it's good that they don't take advantage and charge prohibitive prices, because one way to make a profit would be to charge higher amounts. But I can understand that after the costs involved, that you're probably not going to get very much. You don't get a lot of money from TV. So therefore, it is gate receipts, a little bit of advertising, less the hosting costs for Wembley. So I can quite easily understand why it would struggle to break even or just make a very, very small profit.
We have a relationship, Kieran, with not only fans from several clubs at various levels in the National League, but with club owners, directors and CEOs of clubs at various levels in the National League. And they all have a number of concerns, and which means that every time we discuss the National League, we put out the same invitation to them, which is we would love to speak to somebody from the National League and put these concerns to them and hear their point of view. And they are the most reluctant people. And I don't know why, because we've got a good relationship. Premier League clubs speak to us, the EFL are happy to speak to us. Neil Doncaster at Scottish Football, and I'm not blowing our own trumpet here, but we're not scary. We're the softest interviewers you can get because we think that's the best way of getting information out of people. And all we're offering the National League here is a chance to put their point of view. And it may be that after they've done that, some of the more vocal critics we have of the National League may go, all right, I didn't see that. But all the time they stay stum, it just feeds into conspiracy theories, and it feeds into what you've said from day one of this bloody pod, Kieran, that communication is the most important thing for anyone in football.
Yeah, sunshine's the best disinfectant. Be open. Be open, and the world's a better place for it.
That's a great phrase, Kieran, except it's praising sunshine, so I'm not going to use it. That's how hardcore I am when it comes to my rivalry with the sun. We've got two questions left. They're both interesting ones. The first one, of course they are, because they're from our listeners. The first one is from Austin Maloney. Strong name, Kieran, Austin Maloney. Austin says, I've been thinking about the inequities, same thing, of the current player loan system for a while. It would seem that 10 or so years on from its inception, the EPP has been a success in terms of producing higher quality players. However, it's also led to a rapid transfer of resources from smaller clubs to bigger ones, in the way it makes acquiring promising young players easier and cheaper for the bigger clubs. My question is, considering that rapid increase in transfer fees, should the prices in the EPPP for players also be dramatically increased, or at least be subject to regular review to reflect current transfer fees? And I'm going to ask you first, Kieran, if you could perhaps give us just a potted definition for newer listeners of what EPPP is.
Yes, the EPPP stands for the Elite Player Performance Plan. And it was introduced at the behest of the Premier League with a view to improve the quality of academy development for children, with a long-term aim of making a better England team. So it was introduced, I think it was in 2012. Now, you could argue that England have made progress. Appeared in 2 finals. If you take a look at the number of minutes being played by former academy players in the Premier League, that's gone up as well. And prior to EPPP, there used to be something called the 90-minute rule, which meant that if a child was living more than 90 minutes away from a club's training centre, then they couldn't move to, so if you got somebody in Cornwall, they couldn't go to Chelsea and so on. This was to prevent factory farming, a horrible phrase, factory farming of children. But we are dealing with children.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, EPPP was introduced, and that scrapped the 90-minute rule. It has increased the number of academy scouts, so I think that can be seen as a positive. In my view, I think the England team are better than they were 10 to 12 years ago. Can EPP take credit for that? It can take an element of credit for it, along with many other factors, I think, in terms of development. One of the criticisms of EPP, and my reservation, was that this allowed the bigger clubs, for want of a better phrase, to see somebody who was doing really well for Exeter City's academy or Morecambe's academy or Southend's academy and say, come and join our club. We're such and such a Premier League club. And from the perspective of the child, if I'd heard that Manchester United or Liverpool or Chelsea or wherever were interested in me, you'd be absolutely flattered.
Of course.
But we are dealing with an industry which has a 99.6% failure rate in terms of player development. There's also the perspective of those clubs in the EFL who say, the academy costs us money to run. We don't want to be accused of farming talent. Yeah. But the academy helps us to bring players through into our first team, which saves us money because we have to sign them from elsewhere. And also, if that player goes on to be a success, we can then charge a fee for them. So there was resistance, I think, from clubs in the EFL. And this is where it starts to get, in my view, quite unpleasant. The Premier League effectively turned around and said, well, if you take such an approach, we presently give you something called solidarity payments.
Yeah.
And each club in the EFL, if you're in the Championship, you're getting £4.5 million, £5 million a year from the Premier League. If you're in League Two, you're getting 500 grand a year from what are called solidarity payments. This is part of the broader distribution issue. The Premier League said, by the way, those solidarity payments, that's a voluntary contribution from us. And if you're going to oppose EPP, which you're legally entitled to do, we're legally entitled because we to take away the voluntary support. And I don't want to sound unduly unpleasant here. It's the equivalent of a drug dealer hanging outside a school, giving freebie packets to kids. And then the next time they come back, he's charging money. Because the clubs in the EFL, I'm not saying they became addicted to the solidarity payments, but it became a very significant proportion of their income. It allowed them to compete, it allowed them to pay wages and so on. So there is an element of unpleasantness involved. Now, in relation to Austin's sort of specific elements, there was a tariff created under the rules of EPPP, which meant that if you were an under-9 individual and you went from, let's say, Morecambe or Accrington or Southend to a Premier League club who's got a Category 1 academy, you would get £3,000 of compensation for each year that child had been. Again, I don't want to say on your books, they're kids. They're kids having fun.
I know.
And in the 14 to 16 year group, it was £40,000 per year that they'd been in that particular area. There was a 10-year review in 2022. So the £3,000 from an under-9 went to £5,000. The 14 to 16 figures went from £40,000 to £80,000. And in addition to these payments, if that child goes on to play first team football, again, there is further compensation. So that's the position we've had. It's taken 10 years for the numbers to be increased. Are they enough? I think an existential debate could be had, but it has created problems. It's created roadblocks. Let's say that you are a 12-year-old child, you've been at the academy of a club in League One or League Two, and you're not enjoying it. It could be that you don't get on with the academy coach. It could be that you just, and you and I, we both moved on in our careers, and there's always been push factors and pull factors, in my opinion, when it comes to job news. Well, it's the same, and we're dealing here with children. And what concerns me is that you could have a child who's 11 years old and they're just not at ease. It could be that a couple of their mates are at another club and they want to play with their mates. But all of a sudden, somebody's got to go and pay £30,000 or £40,000 compensation, and that acts as a roadblock. So I'm not criticising the Premier League and EPPP in terms of sort of the child snatcher approach, which from a Willy Wonka perspective, in terms of the big clubs, they're just they spot anybody that's half decent, they're just going to recruit. It can actually work in the opposite direction. You've got a player, you've got a child at a club, they're not unhappy, and children's welfare and happiness should be central to society, in my view. And I'll get on. People will go, he's gone woke again. I'm not. I've got grandchildren. I've had children myself. Children's happiness, I think, is a wonderful thing. And EPPP is not working in terms of dealing with all of those issues. So I've answered, in my view, Austin's question. It benefits the bigger clubs very much. It can also act to the detriment of children.
Austin says, should there be a regular review to reflect current transfer fees? And if the next review happens in 10 years' time, then the answer is yes, there is a regular review, but it's every 10 years. I was going to say, God forbid, Kieran, that anybody should think it's woke to want to put children's welfare and happiness front and centre. But there will be some people out there who think it is woke to put children's welfare front and centre. And the big problem is, and you and I have discussed this in privately when we met, it's like, there have been times in our career when you move on and sometimes it's your choice, and sometimes it's somebody else's choice, and you deal with that, and you rationalise it to yourself. But it's us that are making the decisions. It's not our parents. And at the age of 55, when there's a big change in your career, your parents are. Whereas for a fact that when it's a 9-year-old, a 12-year-old, a 13-year-old, it's the parents that are making the decision for the most part, because of course they've got a little potential cash cow on their hands. And for a fact that if an 11-year-old is unhappy at a particular club, the parents, hopefully more enlightened parents, will say, okay, well, let's find a solution to that. But there'll be so many other parents saying, well, tough. You're staying where you are, or you're moving to a club whether you want to move or not, essentially. And that's the trouble. You can't stress enough the word children in the answer to that question, Kieran. Our last question, Kieran, comes from Joe Dixie. And Joe, if you're listening, and I hope you are, I'm going to do it, but I'm actually reaching my hand out to shake yours, because this is the sort of question I love. Because essentially, Kieran, this is an unanswerable pub debate question, which Joe has asked you to answer, and it's a cracking pub debate question. And Joe Dixie says, I'm a big fan of the pod, and being a big football fan and accountant, it's right up my street. But my question is about the debate of who had it harder to win the treble, Manchester United or Manchester City, from a financial perspective. Clearly, City have a big financial advantage now, but do they have a bigger advantage over the rest of the league than United did in 1999?
Right. I can give an answer to this. Now, an answer is not the definitive answer, which is as follows. I went into the accounts of all of the Premier League clubs in 1999, and the average wage was £7,993 a week. Manchester United's average weekly wage was £17,100 a week.
Wow.
So Manchester United paid 115% of the average wage that season. And they did the treble, and it was a fantastic achievement. And the Baroness was there.
Wow.
To see the Champions League win.
Oh my God, really? Wow.
Which she reminds me, and she was kissed by Gary Neville.
Oy, that took the edge off that story, didn't it?
Yes.
Wow. Well, she was involved with the club, wasn't she? I mean,
yes, yeah.
Wow. Well, I mean, what a sporting event to be part of, though, Kieran.
Yes, absolutely. If we go to 22-23, Manchester City won the treble. Now, in that season, the average wage, the mean wage, as far as the Premier League was concerned, was £74,800 a week, and Manchester City's average wage was £196,800, which meant that they had a 162% payroll cost compared to Manchester United's 115. So, using that as a metric, and I appreciate that other metrics are available, Manchester City did have a greater advantage than Manchester United did in 1999.
Wow. See, I'd like to say that settled the debate, Kieran, and that the people of Greater Manchester and beyond can calm down now, because but they will find another way to keep the argument going. But you say other metrics are available. I mean, but to a layman like me, it would seem that the wages is the most obvious way of comparison, isn't it?
Yes, I think wages is a cost of hiring talent, and as such, it is successful. There are other ways of looking at it in terms of revenue. You could look at wages plus amortization as a metric, and so on. So that there's always alternative approaches, and also you could say that it could be that an awful lot of the Manchester City wage bill was bonuses on winning the trophies. So therefore, the core wage bill was considerably lower. So until we have that data, you can't give an definitive answer. But I will now get a Kevlar jacket on social media if anybody decides to bring this up.
Well, I'm guessing as well, the United fans will probably say that they had more academy players in their treble-winning team than City did in theirs. So that lessened the financial advantage. But those players had still come through and were still being paid a lot of money. So again, if anything, we've made it worse, Kieran, this debate. But it's a cracking question from Joe. Thank you very much, and thank you for your kind comments. And thank you to everyone who's donated to the pod via our Patreon page. If you'd like to make a small monthly contribution to the pod and get access to our chat community and our regular quizzes, and we were discussing with producer Guy just before we started recording other ways of repaying the loyalty of our patrons. So watch this space. You can do all that by going to patreon.com/priceoffootball. If you'd like a question you want answered on the show, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. Don't forget you can follow us on Twitter and you can find us on our YouTube channel. And those of you paying attention over the weekend will have seen awkward photographs of Kieran and I pointing with a cheesy grin at the paperback, because the book is now out in paperback, available in all good bookshops and plenty of mediocre ones as well. And of course, via our website, which is priceoffootball.com. We'll be back on Thursday with our regular news pod, which has already got some big stories to talk about, especially Chelsea. If you're a Chelsea fan, you'll want to listen to the pod that comes out on Thursday. And in the meantime, I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
Oh, thank you very much. Just before I go to that, a couple of things to mention. Kevin's being very modest. Kevin is doing March of the Day next week on behalf of the Lily Foundation. And he's walking you're starting in North London and you're ending up at Selhurst, spread over 3 days. It's 62 miles, is that right?
63.
63 miles.
Yeah.
63 miles. So we will be putting this out on social media, and we'll put it out in the show notes as well. If you'd like to contribute, that would be very grateful. He's been taking it very seriously. I've seen Kevin's legs for the first time, and we've been doing this show for 5 years. That's how serious he's taking this, and it's a fantastic effort, and it's a fantastic cause as well. We'll also be putting out details of the route, so if you want to come along and say hello and have a cheesy selfie, I'm sure Kevin will oblige. So myself and possibly the Baroness will be trying to get to see you on some. I know some of your other friends in industry will be walking along with you as well. So that's absolutely fantastic, and hat is doffed, I can assure you. We also have a live show taking place in just over a month in Balham. We're putting out details for that as well. And it looks as if we will be doing a show possibly in December in Brighton. We're just trying to finalise date. We are going to be doing a charity gig for the Samaritans, which is again a fantastic cause.
Oh, yes, thank you, Kieran. That's very kind of you to raise that. I was going to jump in when you talked about the Baroness, but I thought no, it's fine. If you do want to donate, that'd be very kind of you. You can do it by going to the Lily Foundation website. The Lily Foundation is leading the fight against mitochondrial disease. You can find more details about that on their website, and also you can go to the Lily website and press my face, which that's a bit Alan Partridge, I think. Press my face, or you can text Kevin, all in big letters, to 70560 with an amount. So if you want to donate 10 quid, which would be lovely, or 5 quid, which would be lovely, you text Kevin 10, Kevin 5, or if you're in a particularly generous mood, you can text Kevin 20, Kevin 30, any amount you like. So the enormity of what I'm doing, it's not that much, 63 miles. And in fact, Kieran, I don't mind the walking. The walking bit I can handle. It's the asking people for money. You and I are both of Anglo-Irish background, Kieran, and I keep wanting the flamboyant Irish part of me to take over and just say, give us your bloody money. But instead, the reticent English bit of me just goes, oh, well, I'm doing this walk. If you want to give us some, that'd be great. I just hate asking people for money. But yes, next week, and as Kieran says, we will give details of where I'm walking. There will be various people walking with me. So just come up and say hello. It'd be lovely to see you. Come up and talk about the pod. That'd be fantastic to see you. We'll enjoy your. I won't enjoy your companies. I'll be wheezing and panting, but I'm sure the people walking with me would love to meet you. And of course, Kieran, I'm sure it's not too late to sponsor the Baroness, is it? If you can put those details up on the socials as well, that'd be lovely, because that's a big old walk, and the weather was horrible, wasn't it?
The weather was horrible.
Yeah.
Yes.
The Baroness is not used to walking for 14 miles and 24 miles in driving wind and rain. I imagined it. I had this pleasing image, Kieran, of an American Hollywood-style rom-com where you opened the door after you'd been in all day with your feet up, sitting next to the fire, eating some ceviche, looking at spreadsheet after spreadsheet, and then the doorbell goes and the Baroness is there, soaking wet, tousled, hair everywhere, and you'd forgot to run the bath or put the ice in the bath, more importantly. But we'll see you on Thursday. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The price of football. Price of football.